I will never forget the pale face of Mrs. Sarah when she grabbed my arm at the gate of my mother-in-law's house. "Don't go in," she whispered urgently, her eyes wide with terror. Her entire body trembled as she looked nervously over her shoulder toward the house with its closed windows. I barely had time to process her words when the deafening sound of police sirens shattered the afternoon silence, and 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt in front of the house. What I discovered in the following hours would completely destroy everything I thought I knew about the man who had slept beside me for 7 years, the father of my 5-year-old son, who was sleeping in the back seat of the car after our surprise trip to visit his sick grandmother. But before I continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel Elderly Stories and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. It all started 4 days ago. I was making dinner when Richard came home pale, talking on the phone. I turned off the stove and walked over, worried by his expression. Yes, I understand. I will be there as soon as possible." He hung up and looked at me with eyes full of concern. "My mother is sick, very sick. I need to go to her house right now." Beatrice lived in a small town, a magical town about 3 hours away, sort of like a hidden gem in the Midwest. She was a strong woman who rarely got sick, which made the news even more alarming. "What does she have?" "Is it serious?" I asked, already thinking about what we would need to pack. "I don't know exactly. The family doctor called and said she has a high fever and is delirious. It could be pneumonia." Richard was already pulling a suitcase out of the closet. "You stay with Tommy. We don't know what she has. It could be contagious." "I don't want to risk exposing you two." I agreed, although reluctantly. Beatrice and I always had a close relationship, different from most daughters-in-law with their mothers-in-law. She welcomed me like a daughter from day one, and the idea of not being there to help her bothered me. "Call when you get there, please, and keep me updated on her condition." Richard nodded distractedly while throwing some clothes into the suitcase. 20 minutes later, he kissed my forehead and Tommy's head, who was watching cartoons in the living room, and left. In the following 2 days, I only received short messages from Richard. I arrived safely. "We are at the doctor. She is resting now. Situation under control." On the 3rd day, however, silence. My calls went straight to voicemail. My messages went unanswered. A growing anxiety began to take over me. I tried to convince myself that Richard was probably busy taking care of his mother, maybe in a hospital with bad cell service. But something in the back of my mind kept bothering me. 7 years of marriage had taught me to recognize when something was not right. On the morning of the 4th day, I made a decision. Tommy and I would make a surprise visit. Maybe Beatrice was better, and our presence would cheer her up. If she was worse, Richard would need support and I could help take care of her. "Tommy, how about we go visit Grandma?" "Let's give her and Daddy a surprise," I suggested during breakfast. Tommy's eyes lit up. "Are we going to see Grandma? Can I bring the drawing I made for her?" "Of course, my love. She will love it." In a few hours, I packed a small suitcase with clothes for 2 or 3 days, Tommy's medicine, some toys, and snacks for the trip. Before leaving, I hesitated for a moment and tried to call Richard one more time. Voicemail again. I sent him a message saying we missed him and were worried without mentioning our trip. I really wanted to surprise him. The trip was quiet. Tommy slept most of the time, and I got lost in my thoughts, oscillating between worry for Beatrice and a strange feeling I couldn't name. Richard had been distant in recent weeks, more reserved, working late. At the time, I attributed it to work stress. He was a financial manager at an investment firm and frequently talked about the pressure of handling clients' money. But now, driving down the highway with only the low sound of the radio and Tommy's soft breathing in the back seat, I began to review small details, moments that seemed insignificant in isolation, but together formed a disturbing pattern. Calls he answered on the patio away from my ears, a new lock on his desk drawer at home, more frequent business trips, little lies about where he had been or with whom. I shook my head, trying to push those thoughts away. Was I being paranoid? Richard was a good husband, a loving father. If he was hiding something, it was probably some surprise for me or a work worry he didn't want to share to not upset me. When we finally arrived at the quiet town where Beatrice lived, the sun was beginning to set. I navigated easily through the familiar streets to the yellow house with blue shutters where my mother-in-law had lived since she retired as a teacher. Immediately, I noticed something strange. All the windows were closed with the curtains drawn. Something unusual for Beatrice, who loved natural light and fresh air. Richard's car was parked in front, which brought me some relief. At least he was there, just as he had said. I parked behind his car and turned off the engine. "Are we there?" Tommy asked my son, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Yes, love, we arrived at Grandma's house. But she might be asleep, so we have to be very quiet, okay?" Tommy nodded, unbuckling his seatbelt. We got out of the car, and while I took our suitcase out of the trunk, I observed the house more carefully. It was strangely silent. No movement, no light visible through the cracks in the curtains. If Beatrice was sick and Richard was taking care of her, shouldn't there be some sign of activity? Come on, Mommy Tommy was already running toward the gate, eager to see his grandmother. I closed the trunk and followed my son. We were almost reaching the gate when I noticed movement on the other side of the street. A woman hurriedly came out of one of the neighboring houses, frantically waving at me. "Emily, Emily, wait!" she called in a low, urgent voice. I recognized her as Mrs. Sarah, my mother-in-law's lifelong neighbor, a kind lady who always offered us orange bread when we visited. Now, however, her face was pale, almost gray, and her entire body was visibly trembling as she crossed the street toward us. "Tommy, wait here for a moment. Mommy needs to talk to Mrs. Sarah." My son stopped, intrigued by the serious expression on my face. Mrs. Sarah reached me, panting as if she had run miles instead of just crossing the street. "Don't go in," she whispered, grabbing my arm with surprising strength for a woman of her age. Her eyes were wide, frightened. "Something very bad is happening in that house. What are you saying? Mrs. Sarah, Beatrice is sick. My husband is taking care of her." "No, no, no." She shook her head frantically. "Beatrice isn't here. She traveled to visit her sister in Chicago. She left 5 days ago." My heart raced. Chicago. No, there must be a mistake. Richard told me she is sick with a high fever, maybe pneumonia. Emily, Mrs. Sarah squeezed my arm tighter. "I'm telling you, Beatrice is not in that house. And something very strange is happening. Your husband arrived the day before yesterday with another woman. It was as if the world had stopped for an instant." "Another woman, Richard." The information simply made no sense. It didn't fit the reality I knew. "It must be a nurse," I suggested weakly. "Or a doctor, maybe." Mrs. Sarah shook her head. "She wasn't a health professional, Emily. And they didn't look friendly. He dragged her into the house. She looked scared." Before I could process what I was hearing, the sound of sirens broke the silence of the quiet afternoon. 2 police cars appeared on the corner, approaching quickly. "Mommy!" the police exclaimed. Tommy running to grab my legs, frightened by the noise. The patrol car stopped abruptly in front of the house, and 4 officers got out, 2 of them with hands on the guns at their waists. The officer who seemed to be in charge, a tall man with a gray mustache, walked quickly to the gate. "Ma'am, please step away from the house," he ordered with a firm but not hostile voice. "I need you to take the child to a safe place." But this is my mother-in-law's house," I stammered, confused and scared. "My husband is in there." The officer exchanged a significant look with his colleagues. "What is your husband's name, ma'am?" Richard Miller. "What is happening? Why are the police here?" The officer signaled 2 of his colleagues, who immediately positioned themselves on the sides of the house. Then he turned to me with a softer tone. "Mrs. Miller, I am Commander Gus. We need you and your son to step back for safety reasons. Could you wait at Mrs. Sarah's house? We will need to talk later." Mrs. Sarah immediately took my shoulder. "Come, Emily, let's go to my house. Tommy can have a hot chocolate while we wait." Like in a dream, or rather a nightmare, I let myself be guided to the other side of the street carrying Tommy. He clung to my neck, scared by the situation he didn't understand. From Mrs. Sarah's porch, we watched the police surround the house. The commander spoke something through a megaphone that I couldn't completely make out. There was a moment of tense silence, and then with a quick and coordinated movement, 2 officers forced the front door open. The sound of splintering wood echoed in the silent street, making Tommy tighten his hug on my neck even more. The police entered quickly, guns drawn. "What is happening, Mrs. Sarah?" I asked with a trembling voice. The lady sighed heavily, guiding me inside her house. Last night, she began after settling Tommy in the kitchen with a cup of chocolate and some animal crackers. I heard screams coming from Beatrice's house, terrible screams from a woman. She shuddered visibly, then glass breaking, and then silence. I felt my blood run cold. "And you didn't call the police yesterday," I was scared, she admitted, embarrassed. "We live in a small town, Emily. We aren't used to violence. I thought maybe it was just a fight. But then very early this morning, I saw your husband carrying something to the trunk of his car. Something big, heavy. It looked like a very large suitcase." My mind refused to process what she was insinuating. Richard, my Richard, the man who kindly shooed spiders out of the bathroom for me because he knew I was afraid of them. The man who sang lullabies to Tommy even when he was exhausted from work. No, it was impossible. He drove off, continued Mrs. Sarah, and returned an hour later without the suitcase. That was when I decided to call the police. I told them everything I saw. They asked me to stay home and let them know if I saw him again. I sat heavily on Mrs. Sarah's armchair, feeling as if the world around me was crumbling. Nothing made sense. Why would Richard lie about his mother? Who was the woman Mrs. Sarah had seen? And most disturbing of all, what was in that heavy suitcase? My thoughts were interrupted by firm knocks on the door. Mrs. Sarah went to open it, and a moment later, Commander Gus entered the living room. His face was serious, but there was something in his eyes. Compassion, perhaps, that made my stomach sink even further. "Mrs. Miller," he began, sitting on the armchair across from me, "we need to talk. It's about your husband." Commander Gus took off his hat and placed it on the coffee table, a gesture that seemed old-fashioned but brought with it a certain solemnity. His eyes, tired but kind, met mine. "Mrs. Miller, what I'm going to tell you is difficult, but I need you to stay calm, especially for your son." I nodded mechanically, my body numb with anxiety. "Your husband is not in the house," he began. "The house is empty." "Empty," I repeated, confused. "But his car is outside." "Yes, the car is there, but the house was completely searched. There is no one inside." I tried to process that information. If Richard wasn't there, where could he be? And why would he leave the car? "Commander, I don't understand." "My husband told me his mother was sick, that he came to take care of her. But Mrs. Sarah says my mother-in-law is in Chicago." "Yes, we confirmed it," said the commander. "We contacted Mrs. Beatrice's sister in Chicago. Your mother-in-law is there visiting. She left 5 days ago." 5 days. Even before Richard told me she was sick. But then why would my husband tell me she was sick? The commander sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of many unpleasant truths he had had to communicate over the years. "Mrs. Miller, there is more. We found disturbing evidence in the house. I would like you to come with me to take a look, but..." He looked significantly toward the kitchen where Tommy was still sitting. "I will stay with the boy," offered Mrs. Sarah immediately. "He can watch a cartoon on television while you talk." After settling Tommy in front of the TV with his cookies and hot chocolate, I followed the commander outside. The street was now full of onlookers kept at a respectable distance by 2 officers. Another officer was taking photos of Richard's car. "We are examining the vehicle," explained the commander, looking for evidence. Evidence of what I wanted to ask, but something stopped me. Maybe the fear of the answer. When we entered the house, I was immediately hit by a strong chemical smell, like cleaning product mixed with something metallic I couldn't identify. The living room, which had always been a cozy and tidy space reflecting Beatrice's meticulous personality, was in disarray. The armchair had been moved, cushions were scattered on the floor, and a ceramic vase my mother-in-law adored was broken in a corner. "What happened here?" I whispered, looking around with growing horror. "We believe there was a struggle," replied the commander. "According to Mrs. Sarah's account, a woman was seen entering this house with your husband the day before yesterday, and last night screams and sounds of breaking objects were heard. I took a few steps toward the center of the room, feeling my legs tremble. My eyes were drawn to a dark stain on the wooden floor, a stain someone had tried to clean but not completely. "Is that blood?" I asked, my voice almost inaudible. The commander nodded gravely. "Yes, and there is more in the guest room this way." I followed him down the familiar hallway to the small room where Tommy always slept when we visited. The door was ajar, and an officer was crouching near the bed, examining something on the floor with a flashlight. Unlike the living room, the room was impeccably tidy. The bed made perfectly, the floor visibly clean, every surface polished. It was an unnatural cleanliness, almost obsessive. "Do you notice how this room is different from the rest of the house?" asked the commander. I nodded, feeling a shiver run down my spine. It was cleaned recently, very well cleaned, but not completely. He signaled the officer with the flashlight. "We are using ultraviolet light. It reveals traces of blood that are not visible to the naked eye." The officer turned on the special light, and before my horrified eyes, the apparently clean floor revealed ghostly stains, a splatter pattern that someone had desperately tried to erase. "There is more in the bathroom," continued the commander. "Someone tried to clean a considerable amount of blood. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing, what I was hearing. This couldn't be my husband, the father of my son. There had to be some mistake, some explanation." "Commander," I began, my voice trembling. "There must be a mistake. Richard wouldn't. He never. Mrs. Miller." He interrupted me gently. "There is something else you need to know. Your husband has been under investigation for months. Investigation, why? For financial fraud. Richard Miller and his partner Christina are suspected of operating a pyramid scheme through the investment firm where he works. We are talking about millions of dollars diverted from investors. Fraud millions." I felt as if the ground were disappearing beneath my feet. No, I shook my head. "Richard is a financial manager, yes, but he is honest. He always has been. We live modestly. We don't have luxuries. The diverted funds didn't go to ostentatious personal expenses," explained the commander. "They were transferred to overseas accounts offshore. We suspect your husband and Ms. Christina were planning to flee the country with the money. Ms. Christina, the woman Mrs. Sarah saw." I remembered what she had said, that the woman looked scared, that Richard dragged her into the house, and that woman, I asked hesitantly, "Is she the person whose blood is on the floor?" The commander exchanged looks with the officer who was still examining the room. "That is what we suspect, yes. The amount of blood is consistent with a serious wound, possibly fatal." Fatal. The word echoed in my head like a gunshot. "And you think Richard—" I couldn't finish the sentence. It was too absurd, too terrible. Mrs. Miller, the commander, put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "There is something else you must know. We found a diary under the bed. Apparently, it belongs to Christina. The last entry is from yesterday. In it, she writes about having discovered that your husband planned to betray her, keep all the money. She confronted him, and he became violent. Violent. A word I never associated with Richard. In 7 years of marriage, I never saw him lose control. I never saw him raise his voice, much less his hand. How could this be the same man? I staggered to the edge of the bed and sat down, unable to stay on my feet any longer. My head was spinning with the amount of information, each piece more devastating than the last. "And the suitcase?" I asked, almost involuntarily remembering Mrs. Sarah's account. The commander hesitated, as if weighing how much he should tell me. "We are looking for it. Your husband was seen leaving with the suitcase this morning, driving out of town. He returned without it an hour later. We have teams searching the region, especially isolated areas like hills or dams. A shiver ran through my body as I understood the implication. They were looking for a body, Christina's body. At that moment, the officer who was in the room stood up abruptly. "Commander, we found something." He was holding a small, shiny object with tweezers. It was a delicate bracelet gold with small blue stones. I had never seen it before. "It's not mine," I said automatically, "and not Beatrice's either." "Probably belongs to Christina," nodded the commander, signaling the officer to put the evidence in a plastic bag. My phone rang suddenly, making me jump. I took it out of my pocket with trembling hands. An international number appeared on the screen. "It might be my mother-in-law," I said, showing the phone to the commander. He nodded. "Answer and put it on speaker, please." With my heart racing, I answered. "Hello, Emily." "Emily, thank God." Beatrice's voice sounded distant but clearly agitated. "Are you okay? And Tommy? Where are you?" "We are fine, Beatrice," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. We are at your house, actually." There was a moment of confused silence on the other end of the line. "At my house? How, Emily? I am in Chicago, at my sister's house." I know I replied, feeling tears finally starting to fall. "I just found out. Richard told me you were sick, that he came to take care of you." "Sick me." Her voice went up an octave. "No, Emily, I am perfectly fine. Richard called me this morning desperate. He told me—" Her voice broke. "He told me you and Tommy had been kidnapped. He said he needed ransom money, that I had to transfer all my savings to an account he gave me. Kidnapped." The lie was becoming more elaborate, more terrible. The commander gently took the phone from my hand. "Mrs. Beatrice, this is Commander Gus from the state police. Your daughter-in-law and your grandson are safe with us. There has been no kidnapping. Your son lied to you." "My God," moaned Beatrice. "What is happening? Where is Richard?" "That is what we are trying to find out, ma'am. Please do not transfer any money to the account your son indicated. We are in the middle of an investigation that may involve serious crimes." After some assurances that Tommy and I were really fine and the promise to keep her informed, the commander ended the call. I sat on the edge of the bed in silence, trying to process everything. My husband, the man I loved, the father of my son, was a criminal, a fraudster, and possibly a murderer. "What happens now?" I asked, finally my voice sounding strangely empty even to myself. "Now," replied the commander, "we need to find your husband before he tries to flee again, and for that, Mrs. Miller, we need your help." Mrs. Sarah's living room had been transformed into a makeshift police command center. Maps were spread over the coffee table. Radios transmitted coded messages, and officers entered and exited constantly, always with serious expressions. Tommy was sleeping in the guest room, exhausted by the stress and confusion of the day. Sitting in the armchair with an untouched cup of tea in front of me, I listened to Commander Gus explain the plan. "We have reasons to believe your husband will return," he said, marking a point on the map of the small town. "He left the car at his mother's house probably to not raise suspicion, and now that he asked Beatrice for money, he will want to know if she made the transfer." "And you want to use that as bait," I stated, feeling a strange detachment, as if I were talking about a stranger, not the father of my son. "Exactly," confirmed the commander. "Beatrice will call him, saying the bank is making the international transfer difficult, that they require a representative to make the withdrawal personally here in Mexico. And you think he will believe it?" "Desperate people believe what they want to believe," replied the commander, "and your husband must be very desperate right now. The thought that Richard, my Richard, could be described as desperate was surreal. In our life together, he had always been the definition of calm and stability. When Tommy was born prematurely and spent 2 weeks in the NICU, it was Richard who kept his composure, who comforted me when I fell apart. How could this be the same man who is now fleeing the police, possibly with blood on his hands? And where would this trap be set? I asked, forcing myself to return to the present to focus on the plan. The commander pointed to another spot on the map outside the town limits. Here, the old abandoned mezcal factory is isolated enough for him to feel safe, but also gives us space to position teams around without being detected. I looked at the map trying to visualize the operation. The abandoned factory was about 3 miles from town, on the road leading to the capital. It was a strategic point far enough to seem discreet, but not so isolated as to raise suspicion. And what would my role be in all this, I asked, although I already suspected the answer. The commander exchanged looks with one of the officers before answering. Mrs. Miller, I won't lie to you. Your presence could be a crucial element. If your husband sees you, that could disarm him, make him lower his guard. You want me to be the bait, I translated directly. We won't put you in danger, he assured hurriedly. You would stay in a surveillance van at a safe distance. You would only appear after the capture when he is already contained. I thought about Tommy sleeping innocently in the next room, having no idea his world was about to crumble. I thought about Beatrice, who had welcomed me like a daughter, now facing the terrible revelation about the son she had raised. And I thought about Christina, a woman I never knew but whose blood stained the floor of my mother-in-law's house. I will do it, I decided, my voice surprisingly firm, but on one condition. Tommy stays here with Mrs. Sarah. He cannot see any of this. The commander nodded, relieved. Of course, we had already considered that. We will leave 2 officers here for his protection too. The following hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Mrs. Sarah prepared a room for Tommy where he slept peacefully, oblivious to the chaos that had engulfed our world. I watched him for a few minutes before leaving his little face relaxed in sleep, his small fingers clutching the stuffed bunny he had brought from home. How would I explain to him that his father, his hero, was a criminal? How would I protect his heart from the pain that would surely come in the living room? Commander Gus was talking on the phone with Beatrice, giving her precise instructions on what she should say to Richard. She would call, she would say she was facing difficulties with the international transfer, that the bank required a local representative to authorize the withdrawal. Do you understand, Beatrice? Asked the commander. It is crucial that it seems natural that he believes you are really trying to help him get the ransom money. On the other end of the line, I heard my mother-in-law's trembling voice. Even at a distance, even after discovering her son's lies, she remained the strong woman I admired. I understand perfectly, Commander. I will do my part for Emily and for my grandson. When she hung up, the commander turned to me. She will call him in 15 minutes. If he takes the bait, we will have about an hour to position ourselves at the abandoned factory. I nodded mechanically, still trying to process everything that was happening. A part of me still hoped to wake up at any moment to discover that everything was just a terrible nightmare. But the weight of the cell phone in my hand, the smell of coffee coming from Mrs. Sarah's kitchen, the constant murmur of police radios, everything was too real. And if he doesn't show up? I asked suddenly. The commander exchanged looks with one of the officers before answering. Then we will keep searching. We have teams tracking the entire region, checking roads, hotels, inns. He won't go far, Mrs. Miller, especially if he thinks he can get the money from his mother. 15 minutes later, the commander's phone rang. It was Beatrice, ready to make the call to Richard. Everyone in the room went silent while the commander put the call on speaker. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Just when I thought it would go to voicemail, my husband's familiar voice sounded on the other end of the line. Mother, did you get the money? It was Richard's voice, but at the same time, it wasn't. There was a coldness, a hardness I had never perceived before. Or maybe it was always there, and I just didn't want to see it. Richard's son. Beatrice's voice trembled genuinely. She didn't need to fake despair. I am trying. I am doing everything I can. I went to the bank here in Chicago, but they told me a transfer of that value to an unknown account would raise suspicions that they would need special authorization. We don't have time for bureaucracy, Mother Richard interrupted, his voice tense. They gave a deadline. If I don't deliver the money, I know, son, I know. That's why the bank manager suggested another solution. They have a representative in Mexico in our town. He can authorize the withdrawal directly without all that bureaucracy. He will be there with the cash. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost see Richard weighing, evaluating the risks. Finally, he spoke. Where would this meeting be? At the old, abandoned mezcal factory at the end of the main road. The manager said it is a discreet place where no one would see the transaction. Another silence longer this time. When he asked, finally, today in the afternoon at 5, you will be alone with a black briefcase. You need to go alone too, Richard. He was very clear about that. And will the money be all there? Everything I asked for, yes, son. All my retirement money, the savings of a lifetime. But it is worth it if that brings Emily and Tommy back safe. The mention of our names made my stomach turn. How could he use the people he supposedly loved like that? All right, said Richard after a pause. I will meet him. But if it is a trap, Mother, if something goes wrong... It isn't a trap, son. Beatrice's voice broke. It is your mother trying to help. Please bring my grandson and my daughter-in-law back safe. The call ended. Everyone in the room released the breath they were unconsciously holding. He took the bait, announced the commander already getting up and signaling the other officers. Let's get ready. The next hour was a blur of activity. Disguised police cars left at strategic intervals to not raise suspicion. Bulletproof vests were distributed. Radios were checked. An officer was selected for the role of the bank representative. A middle-aged man with a trustworthy appearance who would be positioned in the center of the abandoned factory next to a black briefcase full of paper, cut in the shape of money, with some real bills on top. Before leaving, I went to the room where Tommy was sleeping and kissed his forehead. Mommy will be back soon, I whispered. I love you more than anything. Mrs. Sarah was at the door of the room watching. He will be fine, she assured me, putting a kind hand on my shoulder. I will take care of him as if he were my own grandson. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Thank you for everything, Mrs. Sarah. Go, she said firmly. Do what you have to do. Later, we rebuild life. The sun was beginning to set when we arrived at the outskirts of the abandoned factory. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, a beauty that contrasted cruelly with the darkness of the situation. The old factory, closed for over a decade, stood like an industrial ghost against the horizon. Faded concrete walls, broken windows, a rusty gate hanging from hinges that seemed about to give way. I was positioned in a surveillance van parked about 200 yards from the factory, hidden by a row of trees. Inside, the van monitors showed images from cameras strategically positioned around and inside the factory. The officer disguised as the bank representative was already in position in the center of what was once the main lobby of the factory, a bluish-black briefcase. He will come soon, murmured Commander Gus, sitting next to me in the van. Stay calm, Mrs. Miller. Everything will turn out fine. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that after this terrible day, I could begin to rebuild some kind of life for Tommy and me. But how do you rebuild on such deep ruins? Movement announced one of the officers in the van, pointing to one of the monitors. My heart raced when I saw a solitary figure approaching cautiously through the side entrance of the factory. Even in the grainy images of the security cameras, even with the motorcycle helmet covering his face, I would recognize Richard anywhere. The man I loved, the man who betrayed not only me, but himself, everything I believed he was. He moved like a predator, cautious, calculating. He stopped at a safe distance from the disguised officer, observing. His right hand was hidden inside his jacket. He is armed, murmured the commander, bringing the radio to his lips. Teams in position. Suspect armed. The disguised officer gestured toward the briefcase, trying to lure Richard closer. Are you from the bank? Asked Richard, his voice muffled by the helmet. Yes, sir, replied the officer calmly. I have the money here as you agreed with your mother. Richard took a step forward, then stopped, still suspicious. "Show me the money first." The officer crouched down and began to open the briefcase. That was when the commander gave the signal. Now he ordered over the radio. In seconds, powerful lights turned on from all sides, flooding the abandoned factory. Officers emerged from their hiding spots, guns pointed. "Police, freeze, hands on your head." The shouts echoed off the concrete walls. Richard froze for an instant. Then with a quick movement, he pulled a gun from inside his jacket and fired into the air. "Stay back!" he shouted, backing toward the exit. "No," I whispered, horrified. Seeing my husband, the father of my son, transformed into that desperate and dangerous stranger. Richard tried to run, but he was already surrounded. One of the officers fired, hitting the tire of the motorcycle that was parked at the entrance. The sound of the shot echoed through the abandoned factory, followed by the popping of the tire. Destabilized, Richard stumbled and fell heavily to the ground. The gun slipped from his hand, sliding across the dirty concrete. In seconds, 3 officers immobilized him, forcing his arms back and cuffing him. Richard Miller. "You are under arrest for fraud suspicion of attempted homicide extortion and illegal possession of a weapon," announced one of the officers while removing the helmet from Richard's head. For the first time in days, I saw the face of the man who had shared my bed, my life. There was no longer a mask of kindness, of stability. His eyes were wild, furious, his jaw tense in an expression I had never seen before. "We will take him to the station," said Commander Gus, standing up and signaling the driver of the van. "Do you want to see him now, or do you prefer to wait until we are at the station?" I hesitated for only a moment. Now I decided. I need to look him in the eyes. I need to understand. If there is anything to understand. The commander nodded. "Let's go then." When the van stopped a few yards from where Richard was being lifted from the ground by the officers, I felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Rage, sadness, confusion, even a painful shred of love. This man had been my world for 7 years, the dedicated father of my son. Or so I thought. I got out of the van slowly, my legs trembling. Richard, now standing, flanked by officers holding his arms firmly, turned his head toward the sound of the door opening. When he saw me, his eyes widened in shock. "Emily," his voice said, a mix of disbelief and confusion. What are you doing here?" I approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away. I observed his face, looking for any trace of the man I thought I knew. I found nothing. "Hello, Richard," I said, my voice surprisingly firm. "Surprise, right? Tommy and I came to visit your sick mother." Realization slowly replaced confusion on his face. His eyes narrowed, calculating. "Emily, honey, this is a misunderstanding." He tried his voice, suddenly soft, persuasive, the same voice he used to convince Tommy to eat vegetables to calm me down after a hard day. "I can explain everything. I am working on a secret operation trying to catch criminals within the company. I had to lie to protect you, to protect Tommy." It was a lie so transparent, so desperate that I almost laughed. Almost. "Enough lies, Richard," I said, keeping my voice low, conscious of the officers around us. "I know about the fraud. I know about Christina. I saw the blood on the floor of your mother's house." The change in his face was instant and terrifying. The mask of concern crumbled, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "You don't know anything," he hissed. "I know enough. I know you lied to me for years. I know you used my name and Tommy's to try to extort your own mother. I know that." My voice broke for a moment. "I know you might have killed a woman and hidden her body." Richard didn't deny it. He showed no remorse. Instead, he looked at me with a coldness that made me shiver. "You were always so naive, Emily," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So easy to fool." "Yes, honey, I am going to work late. Sure, love it is just a business trip. And you believed it all without questioning, without doubting." Each word was like a stab, but I maintained my posture. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. You are right, Richard. I was naive. I believed in you because I loved you, because I trusted you. My only crime was believing that the man I married was who he said he was. Before Richard could respond, a commotion arose at the entrance of the factory. Officers were running toward a figure stumbling inside a woman with torn and dirty clothes, one of her arms wrapped in a bloody rag. "Commander," shouted one of the officers. "We found her on the road trying to get here." The woman lifted her face, revealing bruises and cuts, but eyes that burned with determination. She was young, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair that one day must have been elegant, now matted and dirty. "Christina," whispered the commander beside me. Christina was alive. The effect on Richard was immediate and violent. He struggled against the officers holding him, his face contorted in fury. "You," he screamed. "How is it possible you should be dead?" The officers restrained him with difficulty while others ran to help Christina, who seemed about to faint. One of them offered water. Another called for an ambulance on the radio. "You failed again," Richard said Christina weakly, but with surprising hardness, like always. The commander guided me gently back to the van, taking me away from the chaotic scene. "Let's go to the station, Mrs. Miller. There we can better understand what happened." Before the van door closed, I looked one last time at the man who had been my husband. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Rage, maybe, or something colder and more calculating. This stranger I realized with a shiver. He had slept beside me for 7 years. He had held our newborn son. He had promised to love me until death did us part, and during all that time I never truly knew him. The police station was an old building in the center of the small town, with peeling walls and worn furniture that had seen better days. Sitting on an uncomfortable chair in Commander Gus's office with a cup of bad coffee cooling in front of me, I waited for Christina to be brought in after receiving first aid from the paramedics. She refused to go to the hospital until she spoke to us, explained the commander entering the room after checking the situation. "The wounds are serious, but do not appear to be fatal. She is a strong woman." I nodded silently, still trying to process everything. Christina, the woman I had automatically hated hours ago, the other woman in my husband's life. Now I felt only a strange connection to her, both victims of the same man, although in different ways. "And Richard?" I asked. "He is in the interrogation room. He asked for a lawyer, which is his right. But with the evidence we have, plus Miss Christina's testimony, there isn't much room for defense." The door opened and 2 officers entered, escorting Christina. She looked better than at the factory. Her face had been cleaned, revealing bruises in various stages of healing, and her arm was now properly bandaged. But it was her eyes that drew attention, dark, intense, with a determination that seemed to overcome physical pain. She sat across from me on the other side of the table, and for a moment we just observed each other. 2 women whose lives had been destroyed by the same man. "I am Emily," I said finally, extending my hand on impulse. She looked at my extended hand, hesitated for a second, then shook it briefly. "Christina." Her voice was stronger than I expected, with a slight accent I couldn't identify. The commander cleared his throat, turning on a recorder on the table. "Miss Christina, if you feel well enough, I would like you to tell us exactly what happened at Mrs. Beatrice Miller's house." Christina took a deep breath, looking quickly at me before beginning her story. "I met Richard 3 years ago at the investment firm where I worked. I was a financial consultant specializing in attracting new investors." She paused, moistening her dry lips. "At first it was just a professional relationship. Richard had brilliant ideas. He knew how to make money grow. I had the contacts, the ability to earn clients' trust. When did you start defrauding investors?" asked the commander. Christina looked down for a moment. It started small. A diversion here, another there. Then it grew. Richard was convincing. He said clients wouldn't even notice, that it was money they would never miss. As she spoke, I tried to reconcile that image with the Richard I knew. The man who questioned if we should really accept the wrong change a cashier had given us. The man who regularly donated to Tommy's school coat drive. In the last year, things started to get complicated, continued Christina. Some clients started asking questions, demanding detailed statements. We realized it was just a matter of time until everything came to light. And that was when you decided to flee, completed the commander. Yes. Richard suggested we leave the country, start a new life abroad. We had transferred most of the money to overseas accounts. Everything was ready. Christina stopped, her eyes fixed on me. He told me he was single, that he had no family. I only found out about you and your son later, after it was already too late. I felt a lump in my throat. Richard hadn't just lied to me, but to her too. We were both pieces in his elaborate game. What happened at his mother's house? I asked, my voice almost a whisper. Christina closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When things started getting dangerous in the city, Richard suggested we hide at his mother's house. He said she was traveling, that the house would be empty. He said we would stay there for a few days until we got the final documents to leave the country. She touched the bandage on her arm lightly before continuing. The first night, everything seemed normal. Richard was tense, but I attributed it to the situation. The second night, while he was showering, I took his phone to check some transfers we had made. That was when I saw everything. What did you see? Asked the responder. Messages for a contact in Cancun organizing a single plane ticket. Not two, just one in Richard's name. And transfers. All our joint accounts had been emptied. The money moved to an account only he had access to. Her eyes met mine. There were also messages for you and photos of your son. I felt my heart clench. Even planning to abandon his family, Richard kept up that facade, that double life. When I confronted him, continued Christina, her voice now lower, he transformed. I had never seen him like that before. His eyes were the eyes of a stranger. Cold, calculating. She took a deep breath. He took my perfume bottle and hit me on the head. I fell. He started strangling me, saying I was a problem, that I should never have meddled in his things. How did you survive? I asked, horrified by the violence of the man who had shared my bed. I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was alone, covered in blood. I managed to crawl out of the house to the tool shed in the back. I spent the night there, going in and out of consciousness. The next morning, I saw Richard carrying a large suitcase to the car. I thought, maybe he was going to put me in there. She shuddered visibly. When he left, I tried to call for help, but I was too weak. I spent the day hiding, trying to regain strength. That was when I heard the sirens. I saw the police. The commander asked a few more questions, details about the fraud, about the escape plan. Christina answered everything with surprising clarity for someone who had been through such an ordeal. When she finished her story, she looked exhausted, but somehow also lighter, as if sharing the truth had removed a weight from her shoulders. There is one more thing, she said, putting her hand in the pocket of her torn pants. She pulled out a small USB drive. All the evidence is here. Records of the fraud's names of affected clients, details of the overseas accounts. I always keep backups of everything. Richard thought I trusted him blindly. An ironic smile touched her lips. That was his mistake. The commander took the device, carefully placing it in an evidence envelope. This will be extremely useful for the case, Ms. Christina. Now we really need to take you to the hospital to properly take care of those wounds. While the officers helped Christina stand up, she stopped and looked at me one last time. I am sorry, she said simply, for everything. I didn't know about you, about your son. If I had known, it isn't your fault, I replied. And I realized it was true. The fault was entirely Richard's. When Christina left, escorted by the officers, the commander turned to me. You should rest too. It was a hard day. We can continue this tomorrow. Before that, I said a crucial question still weighing on my mind. What was in the large suitcase Richard loaded into the car? If it wasn't if it wasn't Christina? The commander sighed. We still don't know for sure. Teams are tracking the region where he was seen stopping the car. But if I had to guess, I would say it was evidence of the fraud incriminating documents, maybe even cash, something he didn't want us to find in the house. I nodded, a strange relief running through me. At least Richard wasn't a murderer, despite having tried to become one. Can I see him? I asked suddenly. Before I go, I need to look him in the eyes one last time. The commander hesitated. He already asked for a lawyer. Technically, we shouldn't allow visits at this moment. Please, I insisted, not as a visitor, as a wife. I promise not to interfere in the case, not to ask questions about the investigation. I need this closure. After a moment of consideration, the commander nodded. 5 minutes, and an officer will stay present the whole time. The interrogation room was small and devoid of personality. A metal table, 2 chairs, gray walls. Richard was sitting on one side of the table, hands cuffed in front of him. When I entered, he raised his eyes, and for a fleeting instant, I saw a glimmer of something in his look. Surprise, maybe even shame, but it was quickly replaced by the mask of indifference he now wore. I sat across from him, conscious of the officer standing by the door and the camera in the corner of the room. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. This man who one day was the center of my world now seemed like a stranger. Why, I asked, finally, the only word I could form. Richard tilted his head slightly as if considering the question. Why what, exactly? Why the fraud? Why Christina? Why lie to you? All of it. Anything I just want to understand. He sighed a sound that seemed almost genuine in its weariness. You wouldn't understand Emily. You would never understand what it is to feel trapped, limited to look at the future and see only mediocrity. A mediocre job, a mediocre house, a mediocre life. Our life wasn't mediocre, I replied, feeling a twinge of anger for the first time. We had a home, a son, love. What more could you want? A cold smile touched his lips. More, always more. You were never ambitious, Emily. You settled for so little. I wanted more from life, more money, more power, more freedom. And you were willing to destroy everything to get that, including your own son. The mention of Tommy seemed to affect him in a way my other words didn't manage to. For a moment, his mask fell, revealing something that looked almost like genuine regret. Tommy never suffered, he said, lowering his voice. I always loved him in my own way. In your own way, I repeated, incredulous. Your way included using your son as a piece in a scam to extort your own mother. What kind of love is that, Richard? He didn't answer, his eyes looking away toward the table between us. And us, I asked, my voice softer now. Did you also love me in your own way? Richard raised his eyes, meeting mine. For a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of the man I had known, the man who had made me laugh on our first date, who had held my hand during childbirth, who had danced with me in the kitchen on wedding anniversaries. Yes, he said finally. But it wasn't enough. 3 simple words that summed up everything. It wasn't enough. Our love, our family, our life together, none of that was enough for Richard, and it never would be. I stood up slowly. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to ask. The Richard I knew, or thought I knew, had disappeared a long time ago, if he ever really existed. Goodbye, Richard, I said simply, turning to leave. Emily, he called when I was at the door. I stopped without turning. Take good care of Tommy. I almost laughed at the irony, as if I needed that reminder, as if I hadn't always been the one taking care of our son while he lived his double life. I always did, I replied and walked out without looking back. Commander Gus was waiting for me in the hallway. Is everything okay? I nodded, feeling a strange calm returning. Yes, I am ready to go back to my son now. When we returned to Mrs. Sarah's house, it was already late night. Tommy was still sleeping, oblivious to the hurricane that had devastated our lives. I sat on the edge of the bed where he slept, watching his peaceful little face, his long eyelashes, his chest rising and falling in calm breaths. How would I protect that little heart from what was to come? Mrs. Sarah appeared at the door holding a steaming cup of tea. "I thought you would need it," she said, gently handing me the cup. "Thank you," I murmured, accepting the hot tea with gratitude. "For everything." She sat next to me on the bed, looking at Tommy with affection. He is strong like his mother. He is going to get through this. How do I explain that his father is never coming home again? That everything we knew was a lie? Mrs. Sarah sighed, a sound loaded with wisdom acquired through many years and many pains. You don't explain it all at once, not to a 5-year-old child. You tell him what he can understand, what he needs to know. That Daddy did something bad and needs to be away for a while, that it has nothing to do with him, that it is not his fault. And when he grows up, when he starts asking more questions, then you tell him more as he is ready to listen. The truth is a weight, Emily. You don't put too big a weight on shoulders too small. She touched my hand softly. But that is for tomorrow. Today, you rest. Regain your strength. I nodded, feeling exhaustion finally dominate me. I finished the tea and lay down next to Tommy, hugging him carefully not to wake him. His warmth, his familiar smell were like a balm for my shattered soul. I didn't think I would manage to sleep, but physical and emotional exhaustion soon overcame me, taking me to a deep and dreamless sleep. The next morning I woke up with Tommy pecking my face. "Mommy, Mommy, wake up." "Where is Grandma?" We came to see Grandma. Remember, reality arrived in a painful wave. For a moment I almost wished it were all just a terrible nightmare from which I had just woken up. But the unfamiliar room, Richard's absence, Mrs. Sarah's worried expression at the door, everything confirmed that the nightmare was real. Tommy, my love. I began sitting up and pulling him onto my lap. Grandma is not here. She is traveling, visiting Aunt Margaret in Chicago. Remember her? Tommy made a face, but Daddy said she was sick. That's why he came to take care of her. I took a deep breath. It would start now then. The small truths that would replace the big lies. Sometimes adults make mistakes, Tommy. Daddy got confused. Grandma is fine, she is traveling. But now we need to go home. And Daddy. Are we going to wait for him? I exchanged looks with Mrs. Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. Daddy isn't coming back with us now, honey. He needs to resolve some things. He is going to be away for a while. Tommy's little face contorted in confusion and sadness. Why is he mad at me? No, my love, no. I hugged him tight, feeling tears burn in my eyes. This has nothing to do with you. Daddy loves you very much. But he did some things wrong, and now he needs to fix that. Like when you break a toy and need to fix it, understand. Tommy nodded slowly, although I knew he didn't completely understand. How could he? Not even I could fully understand how the man I loved had transformed into a criminal, into a stranger. After a simple breakfast prepared by Mrs. Sarah, we packed our few things. Commander Gus appeared to take us back home since my car would have to stay for the investigation. "We can stop by the station first," he suggested discreetly, while Tommy was distracted saying goodbye to Mrs. Sarah's cat. "There are some documents that need to be signed, and we need to discuss the next steps." At the station, while Tommy colored drawings in the waiting room under the supervision of a kind officer, I was informed about what to expect in the coming days and weeks. "Your husband will be formally charged with financial fraud, attempted homicide extortion, and illegal possession of a weapon," explained the commander. "With the evidence we have, plus Christina's testimony and the USB drive with the fraud records, the case is quite solid. He will probably face a long sentence." I nodded mechanically, signing the documents presented to me. "And the fraud victims," I asked. "Is there any way to recover their money?" "We are working on that. Part of the money can be recovered from overseas accounts, but it will take time, and unfortunately, it is likely that not all of it will be recovered." A new wave of shame hit me. Even having not consciously participated in the fraud, I was Richard's wife. In the eyes of many, I would be an accomplice, or at least negligent. "You shouldn't blame yourself," said the commander, as if reading my thoughts. "All the evidence indicates that you had no knowledge of your husband's criminal activities. You are also a victim in this story. We left the station with heavy hearts but with a plan. We would return to our house, a house that now seemed like a stage, a backdrop where Richard had played his role of devoted husband and father. I would gather our documents, contact a lawyer, start divorce proceedings. Then we would probably have to move. Start over somewhere else far from the pitying looks, the whispers, the inevitable questions." During the trip back, Tommy fell asleep in the back seat of the police car. I watched the landscape pass by the window fields and small towns that seemed to belong to another world, a parallel reality where normal families lived normal lives, without devastating secrets, without unthinkable betrayals. "Do you have family who can help you?" asked the commander while driving. "My parents live in the South, almost 600 miles away. I have a sister in Chicago. I am going to contact them, tell them what happened." The idea of making those calls, of saying aloud the terrible truths I had discovered, made my stomach turn. And Richard's mother, Beatrice. "She said she will return from Chicago as soon as she can. I am worried about her. This is going to destroy her. She seems to be a strong woman," commented the commander. "Like you." I looked at him, surprised by the comment. "Strong? I don't feel strong. I feel broken. Even so, you faced one of the worst possible betrayals. You discovered that the man you shared your life with was a criminal, maybe even almost a murderer. And yet you are here planning the next step, thinking about how to protect your son, worrying about your mother-in-law. That is strength, Mrs. Miller." His words touched something inside me. Maybe he was right. Maybe surviving this, continuing to breathe, continuing to function, was a form of strength. Not the exuberant and confident strength I always imagined, but a silent strength born of necessity and love for my son. When we finally arrived at our house, my house now, it was already night. The lights were off the house, silent and cold. Tommy, still sleepy, clung to my neck while I carried him inside. "Thank you for everything, Commander," I said, stopping at the door. "I will stay in touch," he replied. "And remember, you are not alone in this." I nodded, grateful for the support, and entered the house, closing the door behind me. There in the silence of our living room, looking at the family photos on the wall, frozen smiles in moments that now seemed to belong to strangers, I finally felt the full reality of my situation. The man I loved, the father of my son, was a criminal, a liar, a stranger. Our life together had been built on lies, and now I was alone, facing an uncertain future, trying to protect my son from truths that not even I could fully understand. But as I watched Tommy fall asleep in his bed, surrounded by his favorite toys, I realized that despite everything, there was still truth in my life. The love for my son was real. The strength I would find to move forward would be real, and maybe one day I would find peace again. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. With that silent promise, I lay down next to Tommy and allowed finally the tears to come, not only for what I had lost, but also for what I still had, for what was still mine. 6 months passed like a fever dream. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, while I struggled to rebuild some kind of normalcy for Tommy and me. We moved to a smaller apartment closer to his school. I went back to working as a teacher, a profession I had abandoned when Tommy was born. Beatrice returned from Chicago, and after selling her house, unable to live with the memories of what had happened there, moved to a small apartment a few blocks from ours. It was a period of painful adjustments and even more painful discoveries. The extent of Richard and Christina's fraud was greater than anyone had initially imagined. Dozens of families had lost life savings, retirement funds, money saved for children's education. Each new revelation was like a reopened wound, each headline in the newspapers, a reminder of the man I thought I knew. Tommy asked about his father almost every day at first. When is Daddy coming back? Why can't we visit him? Doesn't he love us anymore? Each question was a dagger in my heart. Following the advice of a child therapist whom we began to consult, I answered with simple truths, appropriate for his age, always reaffirming that his father's love for him was real, although his actions had been wrong. Gradually, the questions diminished. Richard's absence became part of our new normal. Tommy adapted with the surprising resilience that children possess. I, on the other hand, still woke up sometimes in the middle of the night, sweating cold, dreaming of the blood on the floor of Beatrice's house with the heavy suitcase Richard had loaded into the car. The trial began on a rainy autumn day. The gray sky seemed to reflect the seriousness of the occasion. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, fraud victims, curious people. I sat in the front row next to Beatrice. Her face, always so alive and expressive, seemed to have aged a decade in 6 months. But her eyes maintained a quiet determination, a silent strength I had learned to admire even more. "It is going to be okay," she whispered, squeezing my hand when the officers announced the judge's entrance. When the side doors opened and Richard was brought in, I felt my heart race. He wore a gray suit very different from the prison uniform he had worn the last time I saw him. His hair was carefully combed, his appearance impeccable as always. For a fleeting moment, he looked like the man I married. Elegant, controlled, confident. Our eyes met briefly. Something passed through his eyes. Regret, maybe, or just calculation. I looked away, unable to hold that connection any longer. The prosecutor stood up, a tall, thin man with thick-rimmed glasses. His voice echoed through the silent room as he detailed the charges. Aggravated financial fraud, attempted homicide, extortion, illegal possession of a weapon. This case, he declared, looking directly at the jurors. It is not just about stolen money, although millions were diverted. It is about betrayed trust. Trust of clients who believed they were investing in their future. Trust of a business partner who almost lost her life. Trust of an elderly mother emotionally manipulated and more deeply. He paused, looking briefly toward me. Trust of a family that believed they knew the man who lived under their roof. As the prosecutor continued detailing the evidence fraud, documents victim testimonies, Christina's account of the attempted homicide, I studied Richard. His face remained impassive, a mask of calm I now recognized as his most effective defense. Only occasionally, a muscle in his jaw twitched, the only visible sign of tension. When it was Christina's turn to testify, she entered the room with firm steps. The physical wounds had healed, but something in her eyes, a caution, a mistrust, suggested that the emotional wounds were still fresh. Dressed in a simple suit, hair gathered in an austere bun, she looked very different from the bloody and desperate woman I had seen 6 months ago. Her testimony was clear and direct. She described how she met Richard, how he brought her into the fraud scheme with promises of quick wealth, how she gradually realized the extent of his lies, and then in graphic detail, she recounted the night he tried to kill her. It changed in an instant, she said, her voice surprisingly firm. One moment we were arguing about the money, about the tickets, about his plans to abandon me. The next second, his eyes transformed. He took my perfume bottle from the dresser and hit me on the head. She touched her temple lightly where a thin scar was still visible. When I fell, he started strangling me. He said I was a problem, that I knew too much, that I talked too much, that no one would miss me. The defense attorney, a middle-aged man with a perpetually skeptical expression, did his best to discredit Christina's testimony. He suggested she was as guilty as Richard in the fraud, that she was trying to get a lighter sentence by putting all the blame on him. He insinuated that the fight had been mutual, that she had attacked Richard first, but Christina remained unshakable. Yes, I participated in the fraud. I never denied it. I am prepared to face the legal consequences of my actions. But no, I didn't attack Richard. And no, I didn't make up the attempted homicide. The medical records, the photos of my wounds, the blood found in the house, all that confirms my version. Richard Miller tried to kill me because I discovered he planned to betray me, keep all the money, and abandon me. When it was my turn to testify, I felt a strange detachment as if I were talking about someone else's life. I answered the prosecutor's questions, clearly recounting the day I arrived at Beatrice's house, Mrs. Sarah's warning, the discovery of the blood, the revelation about the fraud. The defense attorney was more aggressive with me than he had been with Christina. He insinuated that I must have suspected Richard's activities, that it was impossible to live with someone for so many years without noticing discrepancies. "You never questioned the source of the resources that supported your lifestyle?" he asked, his voice loaded with insinuations. "What lifestyle?" I retorted, feeling a spark of indignation. "We lived modestly. Richard's salary at the investment office was good but not extravagant. Our house was mortgaged. Our car was a basic model. There were never signs of inexplicable wealth. And the frequent business trips, the secret calls, the extended hours at work. You never suspected anything. Suspected what exactly? That my husband was committing fraud, that he was leading a double life. No, I never suspected that. I trusted him." I looked directly at Richard as I pronounced the last words. That was my only mistake. Over the following days, more witnesses were called: fraud victims, police officers involved in the investigation, forensic experts who analyzed the evidence of the attempted homicide. The prosecution's case was solid, almost irrefutable. The defense tried to argue that Richard had been manipulated by Christina, that she was the mind behind the fraud. They tried to minimize the severity of the aggression, suggesting that Richard had acted in the heat of the moment with no real intention to kill. But the evidence, including searches found on Richard's computer about how to hide a body and depth to bury, contradicted that narrative. On the penultimate day of the trial, Richard finally had the opportunity to speak. He stood up slowly, adjusted his jacket, and looked around the room before fixing his gaze on the judge. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice calm and measured, "I am not going to deny the charges against me. The evidence is clear." A murmur ran through the room. No one expected a confession at this point. I committed fraud. I deceived people who trusted me. I betrayed my business partner, my mother. He paused, looking briefly in my direction. And my family. I kept my expression neutral, although inside I was in a whirlwind. Was this another performance? Another manipulation? Or was there some genuine truth in his words? "I have no excuses for my actions," he continued. "Only explanations which I know do not diminish the severity of what I did. I started with small diversions, believing I could return the money before anyone noticed. But one lie led to another, one diversion to a larger one, and soon I was trapped in a web I wove myself." He took a deep breath before continuing. As for the charge of attempted homicide against Christina, his eyes deviated briefly toward her sitting on the other side of the room. There was an altercation. Yes, I lost control. I acted violently, thoughtlessly. I didn't intend to kill her, just silence her. When I realized the magnitude of what I had done, I panicked and fled. It was cowardice, I know. And your wife. Your son asked the judge an unusual intervention, but one that seemed to vocalize the question everyone in the room was asking. The fake kidnapping to extort your mother. Richard looked down for the first time. It was my lowest moment, he admitted. I was desperate. I needed money to flee. I used the people who should be most important to me as pawns in a sordid game. He raised his eyes again, looking directly at me. "Emily, I know you will probably never forgive me, and I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that despite all my lies, my feelings for you and for Tommy were always real. You were the only genuine thing in my life of falsehoods." I felt tears burn in my eyes, but I refused to shed them. I wouldn't give Richard that satisfaction, that proof that his words could still affect me. On the last day of the trial, the judge pronounced the sentence: 20 years in prison for financial fraud, attempted homicide, and extortion, without possibility of parole for at least 15 years. As the officers took Richard away, he looked at me one last time. There was no longer falsehood in that look, just a resigned sadness and something that seemed almost relief, as if finally the weight of the lies had been removed from his shoulders. When we left the courthouse, Beatrice and I walked side by side in silence for a few moments. "It is over," she said finally, her voice tired but firm. "Yes, I agreed now we can begin to rebuild." She squeezed my hand, a simple gesture that carried the weight of our shared history, of our shared pain, and now of our shared hope. Together she said, a sad smile touching her lips, "For the first time in months, I really believe we will be fine." And surprisingly, I believed it too. 2 years passed since that lunch. Daniel and I moved slowly, building a relationship based on absolute honesty, on mutual respect, on shared understanding of each other's fragilities and strengths. Tommy and Julie became inseparable, a small team united by books, games, and childhood secrets. Beatrice adopted Daniel as the son she never had, besides Richard, frequently inviting him to cook together, teaching him family recipes. Richard continues in prison facing his sentence with a resignation that suggests some kind of internal transformation. Tommy visits him every 2 months, always returning with stories about the books his father is reading, the courses he is taking, the letters he writes to other fraud victims as a form of reparation. I don't know if that transformation is genuine, if it will last beyond the prison walls, but for now, it seems real to Tommy, and that is what matters. As for me, I learned that life rarely follows the paths we plan, that the people we love can betray us deeply, and that strangers can become our safe harbor. That strength doesn't come from the absence of falls, but from the determination to get up after them. That whisper from Mrs. Sarah on that fateful afternoon had changed my life forever, had destroyed the reality I knew. But from the ashes of that destruction, something new was emerging. Something truer, more authentic. Something built not on convenient lies, but on difficult and honest truths. And for that, as strange as it seems, I am grateful.